Staring out from the observation deck of the Colorado Capitol building, you can see a long stretch of Colfax Avenue.
If you look out west, you can see where Colfax sort of runs into the mountains. And as we look east, you can see the Anschutz campus, the Children's Hospital campus.
The deck is like a wraparound balcony just under the Gold Dome. And like how you can see all around from up here, you can also see this dome from lots of places in town, in part because Denver has kept big buildings from boxing it in.
If you're on I-25 and you look towards the Capitol, you'll see sort of a U shape of tall buildings with the Capitol in the center, which I think is pretty great. I always joke with my kids, hey guys, look, we can see work. There's my office.
Amanda Clapham is part of the Capitol's nonpartisan visitor services staff, so this is truly her office building, and she loves showing it off from bottom to top.
If you're mainly interested in seeing the view, I would definitely recommend coming in the morning because as the light heads west, the mountains look spectacular.
It's hazy outside on this visit to the state capitol, so my view isn't so clear, but it's still a 360-degree perspective on all of Denver, our capital city, where laws that govern Coloradans get written and passed. But in Clapham's view, this building represents so much more than that. It's the people's house.
It is a public building, and literally everyone is welcome here. And functionally, what that means is that, particularly during the session, but year-round, we have protests on the West Steps, as well as events on the West Steps. We have all different kinds of stuff, and pretty much anyone who wants to can get a permit for the West Steps. And I think that's really important because everybody should have the opportunity to have their voices heard. And I think this building is a real symbol of that.
This People's House opened its doors in November 1894, a grand neoclassical monument in the West, built of local materials, but with some of the feel of the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
And like many state houses across the country, Colorado's Capitol building is a trove of artwork, history, and curiosities.
And stories. Lots of stories. This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capitol News Alliance, a show about Colorado politics and policy. I'm Benta Berkland, and for this episode, we're heading inside the state capitol building, literally.
I love history. I love the very specific nature of Capitol history.
Purplish producer Steph Wolf recently took a tour of the Colorado Capitol to indulge some of our curiosities about the physical structure itself, its inhabitants, and even some controversies.
Hi, yes, I got connected with Amanda Clapham, who you just heard from. She showed me around the building, including making that 99-step climb from the third floor up all the way to the observation deck.
On Purplish, we're usually talking about what happens under the Gold Dome, one way or another, the consequential laws and debates in the state's seat of power. But for this episode, we decided to spend some time exploring the building itself, visiting its walls and halls, looking at how it's changed over the years and what we can learn about Colorado from it.
And we discovered that what's inside the State House can open up bigger conversations, not just about history, but about the state right now.
We started up high just under the Gold Dome, but let's travel down a little bit to the third floor rotunda. This is sort of an internal balcony. You can look up to the dome from underneath. It's a very prominent place in the building. And we're going to visit an art collection that's generated an unusual amount of national attention this year.
So I know this was of interest to you, and I'll talk a little bit about it. This is our presidential portrait collection.
So yeah, when I was setting up this tour with Clapham, I did let her know that I wanted to stop here. And that's because of the controversy around one portrait in particular, the picture of our current president.
President Donald Trump dropped a post on Truth Social complaining about how much he disliked his portrait in the Colorado Capitol, calling this portrait, quote, truly the worst.
I mean, when Trump doesn't like something, he really can have a way with words. He claimed the artist, quote, purposefully distorted his likeness. He also said she must have lost her talent as she got older, and that people from Colorado had been calling and writing to the White House to complain about the picture.
This is not an issue that we foresaw at all.
Definitely wild and unexpected that the President of the United States was spending time thinking about this painting of himself in Colorado in our capital. It felt kind of random, especially because there hadn't been any issues with how this portrait looked when it was first displayed.
Yeah, I never saw it on the wall, but when I looked it up online, it's kind of a standard portrait. He's in a suit coat with a red tie, and he's staring sort of neutrally forward.
I did see it pretty regularly. This portrait gallery is on the same floor as the third floor press room where I have my office. And what's really funny, though, this wasn't the first controversy about Trump's portrait at the Capitol.
Oh, do tell.
Yes. So when Trump was elected the first time, there was a space in this gallery reserved for his eventual portrait. But a couple years passed without it being commissioned, so it's just a blank space. Then in 2018, a Democratic legislative staffer helped members of a progressive group sneak into the Capitol kind of after hours, and they put a picture of Russian President Vladimir Putin right near the spot reserved for Trump.
Oh, wow. That is really something.
It led to some fallout, but what the prank really highlighted was the fact that Colorado still didn't have a portrait of Trump because no one had raised the money for it. That prompted Colorado Republicans to start fundraising to get it done. When they did finally put it up, there was this big celebration. So it was extra surprising to have Trump suddenly attack this portrait years later.
Well, Trump's social media tear last winter did seem to have the desired effect. Legislative leaders removed the painting.
Yes, it happened very quickly. The next morning, the space on the wall was empty again where his portrait used to be. I didn't necessarily think it would be resolved quite this quickly, but legislative leaders in both parties were not interested in picking a fight with the President of the United States in the middle of our legislative session.
Well, that space isn't empty anymore. There is now a new portrait in that spot, and this portrait has the president's approval. It's got a very different vibe from the first one. It's sort of based on his mugshot. He's almost frowning out of the frame at the viewer. And this is a random detail, but his tie in this portrait is blue.
The White House donated this new portrait, so at least Colorado Republicans didn't have to do any fundraising to get this. There is talk of maybe getting a different portrait eventually. I don't know if that's going to happen. I did find it kind of interesting that Democratic officials certainly didn't want to be involved with any of this. They didn't try to use it to irritate the president more. There were a few snarky press releases, but overall it was like, okay, Trump, you want it changed? Let's change it.
I mean, it was interesting, too, because this whole controversy is probably the most attention these presidential portraits have gotten in a long time. But they do have interesting history behind them. For starters, it's not like Colorado has been collecting them since statehood. Much of the collection was donated to the state in the 20th century.
A single family commissioned these paintings, and the bulk of the collection was done by portrait artist Lawrence Williams, who was fairly famous in his life for doing portraits mainly of living people.
So the family donated the collection on the condition that they'd be available on view for the public for free.
Before it was hung here, it actually traveled the state in a traveling exhibit.
The collection was installed at the Capitol in 1982, and the artist Williams continued to paint portraits. So you really do see this uniformity in the majority of the paintings lining the rotunda until you get to President Obama. Williams died before he could paint Obama, so Presidents Obama, Biden, and Trump are painted by other artists.
The Obama portrait was actually painted by a Colorado Springs artist, and she did that first Trump portrait, the one he really didn't like. And one thing that the president was angry about was he thought she made Obama look so much better than him. And from other news reports, Trump's attacks have been really hard on this Colorado Springs artist. and she worried that it could permanently damage her reputation and hurt her chance for commissions in the future.
What's kind of interesting, too, is that this is not a collection that many state capitals have, being portraits of the presidents going back to George Washington. But it also may not be around that much longer in the Colorado Capitol Rotunda.
Even before the Trump controversy, the committee that oversees historic preservation at the State House, and this is current lawmakers, former lawmakers, other people with expertise in this area, they had, according to one member, danced around whether they should replace the presidential portrait gallery with portraits of all of Colorado's governors instead. Those gubernatorial portraits are currently hanging on the first floor.
Yeah, and the committee really ramped up that discussion in May as the state starts to prepare for its 150th anniversary celebrations next year.
You know, it does not have to be forever, but at this time that we put presidential portraits in historic storage and put out all of the governor's portraits for the Colorado 150th.
At that meeting, Don DePrince, who's the president and CEO of History Colorado, spoke to this idea.
It does not make sense to me to take up such a significant amount of space in our state's capital when we don't even have space to hang all of our governor's portraits.
To be clear, swapping out presidential portraits for governor's portraits wasn't embraced by everyone. Some felt it was just a knee-jerk reaction to all the Trump drama, and it might take a lot of logistical planning, because if you think about it, the public doesn't know much about former Colorado governors, and it's not as accessible to all these tour groups coming through the Capitol compared to looking at a portrait of, say, Abraham Lincoln.
Someone would have to develop the interpretation to go along with the governor's portraits so that those things could be explained and made important to the children and other people who are looking at them.
And it's not like highlighting the governors wouldn't come without their own controversies. Colorado has a fairly checkered history.
Yeah, that's right. At least one former governor had open ties to the Ku Klux Klan. Others presided over massacres of American Indians, other violent episodes. This all actually came up not too long ago in discussions because the state found a whole collection of governors' portraits it had misplaced.
The governor portraits are not a complete collection. They're missing a few. But Clapham says when that discovery did happen, they had conversations about what to do with some of the portraits. For example, the governor who apparently belonged to the Klan. In the end, they decided to hang all of the portraits, saying that this is part of the state's history.
How we look at education in this building is that we are sharing all of Colorado's history, for better or for worse.
These are questions a lot of people have really wanted states to confront as they look at their histories. Although, of course, at the national level, we're at a moment when the pendulum's swinging in the opposite direction. You have President Trump wanting to overhaul parts of the Smithsonian Institution because he thinks they're painting too negative a picture of American history. And, quote, he wants to end wokeness.
Yeah, and it will be really interesting to see if what's happening at the national level trickles down to the local level and how the people in charge of the state capitol, whether they want to wade into some of these thorny issues or not.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capitol News Alliance.
You love podcasts to keep up with the news. Now there's an easy way to find out what's happening in Colorado every day. The Colorado Today podcast is new from the same trusted source that brings you Purplish. You'll get the top stories, on-the-ground reporting, and moments of curiosity. Follow Colorado Today for the statewide news you need each weekday on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capitol News Alliance.
So if our tour is taking us from top to bottom in the state capitol, then it's time for us to head down from the third floor to the one you know especially well, Bente. The second floor.
Hey guys, 1, 2.
This is where the House and Senate chambers are.
So we're here in the House lobby. This is the public area outside of the House chambers. On the other side of these doors, you actually have to have an invitation. At all times, but specifically during the session, you have to actually be invited by a representative.
For members of the public, they can view the House and Senate proceedings from the galleries above the chamber. But to be on the floor, a member of the public would need an invitation. And even then, they have to stay along the perimeter edges. Only lawmakers can walk wherever they want, including crossing the center aisle. And for reporters who are allowed at the press table and around the perimeter, that's one of the first rules we have to tell new reporters when they come to the Capitol. Do not walk in between a lawmaker's desk or that center aisle because you will be tackled by a sergeant.
I love how when you get to the chambers, you realize how many political sayings are based in the physical reality of how things are set up. There really is an aisle, a center aisle, that divides the two parties, Republicans and Democrats. And there really is a lobby where lobbyists stand around trying to talk to lawmakers. Though that's not the reason I wanted to take us to the House chamber. I wanted to talk about how it looks, because Bente, years ago, you covered the surprising story of how the chambers came to look the way that they do today.
This was back in 2014, and to set the scene, the House and Senate chambers were pretty drab. The walls were covered in beige fabric, the ceilings were these dingy acoustic tiles, and this story starts with a lawmaker just sitting at his desk and noticing a radiator.
When I first came into the House, I was sitting in one of the chairs down on the floor looking up at the gallery, and there was a radiator that was crooked and broken.
This was Representative Frank McNulty, and the radiator, it just really bothered him that it was crooked.
And I asked the chief clerk, I said, why don't we fix the radiator?
And so they set out to fix it?
They did, but it didn't happen immediately. The House clerk at the time, Marilyn Edens, tried to see how complicated it would be, and it turns out it would have been pretty complicated. She said there were all these pipes behind the radiator, and Capitol building staff said we can't just adjust it. But McNulty eventually became the Republican Speaker of the House, and he got someone working on it. Fixing the radiator led them to mess around with the wall coverings, and they started to uncover these original details.
Yeah, you can see that stenciling now in the chambers, white designs and curlicues on brightly painted walls. So I find it a little surprising that someone at some point covered it all up.
Apparently in the 1950s, they weren't into that sort of thing, and I think it was an acoustic issue too. So they had all these ceiling tiles everywhere. And once they got rid of those, they found these gorgeous skylights in both chambers, completely covered up. And I'd covered the Capitol when everything was this beige drab, and it's like, you don't know how bad it looked until you see it now. It's just the most incredible transformation.
We found out pieces of history that aren't recorded anywhere.
All told, what started with McNulty looking at this wonky radiator turned into a $6 million restoration project. And I am still impressed every time I walk in either chamber of just how incredible it does look.
Okay, so from the second floor, we're going to head down the stairwell to the main floor of the Capitol. And as we do that, I have something that I feel obligated to do, and that's debunk a tale about the building.
So in the stairwells, you can see globes, brass globes on the finials on the staircase. And these right here look similar to cannonballs.
The cannonballs, yes, those are on these staircases, and I've always heard from people in the Capitol that these are actual cannonballs covered in brass.
Colorado became a state right after the Civil War ended, and so that was obviously big news. It was a big part of our national story, and so somewhere along the line, a rumor got started that these were cannonballs saved from the Civil War.
Well, turns out they are, in fact, not cannonballs. What are they?
They're just finials.
I think our editor is going to be especially devastated by this revelation. As you descend the stairs from the chambers, their huge, wide marble staircase, you get to the base of the Capitol's rotunda. This is the center of the building.
The whole building has a sort of Greek cross layout and neoclassical design. If you can imagine from this center rotunda, there are corridors that stretch out to the north and south, east and west. And in this central circular area, Clapham points out to me this set of paintings by a very famous Western artist who lived in Colorado named Alan Tupper True.
These murals that you see around you are called the water murals and represent Colorado's most valuable natural resource, which is, of course, water. Not gold, as many people think.
Clapham calls these a centerpiece of the Capitol building.
And Steph, you mentioned this earlier, but on the first floor is also the governor's portraits, including the governor who belonged to the Klan.
Yeah, I did end up looking up a bit more about him because I was curious. This was Colorado's 24th governor, Clarence Morley. In the 20s, the KKK had a lot of members in elected office in Colorado. The mayor of Denver, the secretary of state, and Governor Morley. I will say he was defeated after one term, and a lot of the Klan-backed legislation that he pushed, it failed in the legislature. Though that wasn't even the end of his misdeeds.
He also ended up committing massive mail fraud and ended up going to prison.
But there he is now, up on the wall on the first floor. And interestingly enough, around the corner is a quilt honoring women's contributions to the state.
This is perhaps my favorite thing in the entire building. This is called the Women's Gold Tapestry. This tapestry was created in 1976 for Colorado's centennial celebration. Colorado's also called the Centennial State. We became a state 100 years after we became a nation.
It's interesting there's a quilt for important women since there aren't any women in the portrait collections we've talked about. The U.S. has never had a woman president, and in Colorado, we've never had a woman governor or even a U.S. senator.
Well, and Clapham says the woman behind this tapestry, who was an educator, noticed the lack of women representation at the State House.
She wanted to change that. This tapestry actually traveled the entire state, county fairs, historical societies, etc., where visitors, Coloradans, anybody who wanted to added a few stitches. So there were people adding stitches ranging in age from 2 to 92.
And there are some women sprinkled in other parts of the Capitol. There's a stained glass window of Emily Griffith, the educator, and another of Ruth Stockton, the first woman state Senate president pro tem.
Yeah, and there are more women represented in what's called the Ring of Fame collection up on the third floor. But when you look at the collections representing the people in power, the people who have held these high offices, it's just a different story.
The Capitol is a living, evolving building, and the state's working right now on setting up a memorial for the Sand Creek Massacre. That's been a long time coming, and that will mark another significant milestone for the Capitol once that's eventually unveiled.
So I have to confess, I did not get to go down to the basement on this tour.
Well, you really missed out, Steph. The cafe's down there. Actually, it's closed right now, but it's reopening. It's small, but it does have some critical food that you need during session. There's some house hearing rooms, an archive, and then the basement press room.
It's funny that you should mention the basement press room because I'd actually like to phone a friend who works in the basement press room.
Let's do it.
So Lucas Brady Woods from KUNC, hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Lucas, because when we were planning this episode, we heard something interesting, that you recently got a rare peek into the legendary tunnels under the Capitol. I have to say, for all the years I've worked there, I have never been in those tunnels.
Yes, the legendary tunnels. And I did get a little tour recently. I was at the Capitol kind of late one evening. I was there preparing for the special legislative session, and one of the building's cleaners actually offered to take me down into the tunnels, which, of course, I jumped at.
Yeah, I'm definitely jealous of that. How did you get down there?
Well, there's this door underneath the Capitol Rotunda that's actually under the big central staircase, and it says authorized personnel only, and it's locked, so most people can't get down there, but that's the main access point to the tunnels. And then once you're through the door, there's another staircase that leads down to a room that has tunnels sort of branching off in a bunch of different directions. And the first thing that really struck me was how old it looked and felt down there. It's like the walls are made of stone and the tunnels have arched ceilings, and it even smells like an ancient tomb or something, a little musty and dusty, which I think is to be expected.
I've read that there's all these different kinds of rumors about the tunnels, some tough to prove, others appear to be tough to put to rest. What have you heard, Lucas?
I mean, people love the lore around these tunnels. How could you not, right? Some people say there's even a hidden treasure of silver coins hidden down there. Others say some 19th century serial killers used the tunnels. Well, these are hard to confirm, I gotta say. Might be true, might be not. And some even say it's haunted. And of all places, this would definitely be a good place for a haunting. But then there's lore around where the tunnels actually lead, right? I didn't get into the furthest reaches of this place, so I can't confirm this, but I've heard they once led all the way to the Brown Palace Hotel, which is a number of blocks away in downtown, and another led under Grant Street to a former hotel that's right across the street. I think it's an apartment building now. But the unconfirmed rumors are that lawmakers use these tunnels to visit the hotels for meetings with their mistresses back in the day. And whether that's true or not, honestly, it's easier to believe than some of the other rumors about these tunnels.
Thanks, Lucas. We appreciate your insights from your sub-basement tour of the tunnels.
No problem.
So, Benta, one of the things that was really fun as we were preparing this episode was getting to hear about other state capitals.
Yeah, I mean, you pick up a lot of random things when you're a politics reporter. And when we started talking about this, I reached out to the perfect person for Capitol trivia. Her name is Acacia Squires, and she edits State House reporters from across the country for NPR. And she has a lot of Capitol fun facts. A few favorites she told me about. One is Nebraska has a Capitol cat, Cameron the cat. He even has his own Facebook page.
Oh, cute. So wait, is he just there? Like, is he a stray cat or does he belong to someone?
Apparently, he lives a few blocks away. He does belong to someone, but he hangs out there, especially every morning. He sits on this ledge outside the Capitol. He welcomes people into the building. He's a huge, huge bipartisan hit. I mean, he's incredibly popular. And then keeping with that animal theme is Old Abe in Wisconsin.
I'm sorry, but who is Old Abe?
Old Abe is a bald eagle and was a mascot for an infantry division in the Civil War in Wisconsin. There's now a taxidermy replica in the Wisconsin Capitol. Acacia said another Capitol that really stands out is New York. Instead of neoclassical themes like a lot of capitals, it's very medieval.
The whole Capitol is like carved stone, and there are a bunch of like goblins and demons and stuff carved into the stone.
And I felt like we really have to give a shout out to Virginia. I spoke with the State House reporter there, Michael Pope. That Capitol was designed by Thomas Jefferson.
It's really important for Jefferson to make sure that the Capitol had a dome. However, he also wanted the exterior of the building to look like a Greek temple, like the Parthenon or something. So he did this very interesting trick, which is that there is a dome, but you can't see it from the external part of the building. You have to be in the rotunda in order to look up and see the dome.
That almost sounds like an optical illusion.
Steph, I know you lived in Kentucky for a bit. Tell me something about that Capitol.
In the hallways near the Capitol Rotunda, there are these glass cabinets full of porcelain dolls. And each doll is a mini replica of the First Ladies of Kentucky. They're made to be sort of in proportion to that First Lady's height. Some are dressed in the gown they wore at the inauguration. Even at times, they used a piece of that gown to create it for the doll. And the collection started back around 1970.
As you know, Colorado has a first gentleman right now. What does Kentucky do if they have a first gentleman?
Well, I can only look a little bit to history to try to answer this. So when Kentucky elected its first and only woman governor, there were calls to make a porcelain replica of her husband. But in the end, it was decided the collection is the, quote, First Ladies in Miniature. And the argument was that as governor, she was the First Lady of the Commonwealth. So they made her into a doll instead of her husband.
Huh. Okay. So if you're a first gentleman, no porcelain doll for you.
No porcelain doll for you, at least not presently. And I should add that the First Lady definition is applied broadly, as some of the governors were not married or were widowed when they entered office. So there are some mothers of governors represented in the collection as well.
I'm sure if you travel the country to every state house, you're going to find something pretty interesting everywhere you go.
So if you're a real nerd on this stuff, there are these Capitol passport books that you can buy and track how many that you visit. You get like a stamp in the book. Kevin Snow started one of these companies in Denver. And so I reached out to him and I asked him what his favorite was. He said I was at the top of his list.
It has beautiful colors. It has beautiful ground. It is not surrounded by a city or an ugly parking lot or anything really to detract from the grounds. It has a great view of downtown Des Moines, which is set a little bit away. And the law library there will just knock your socks off.
You know what? I saw that on a list as we were preparing for this as the best state capital in the country.
I think what's also interesting, maybe a good note to end on here, is that apparently many people who collect state capitals, they often tend to put off Bismarck, North Dakota until they've hit all of the others. And the state has actually embraced this designation. It started a club called the Best for Last Club to celebrate the people who finally make it and finish off their state passport books.
It's like crossing that finish line at the end of the marathon. I feel like I personally need to go on a state capital road trip right now. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit how few state capitals I've seen, even though I've spent so much time in Colorado's.
Yeah, let's do it.
That's it for this episode. Purplish is a production of member-supported Colorado Public Radio and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.
The CCNA is a collaboration between KUNC News, Colorado Public Radio, Rocky Mountain PBS, and the Colorado Sun, with support from news outlets throughout the state. Funding for the Alliance is provided in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Stephanie Wolf.
And I'm Benta Birkland. Our editor is Megan Verlee. Sound design and engineering by Shane Rumsey, who also came up with the idea for this episode. Our theme music is by Brad Turner.
And a thank you to Amanda Clapham for her very thorough tour of the Capitol. Purplish will be back in your feeds in 2 weeks with a look at how the election went and a preview of the midterms. Subscribe now so you don't miss an episode.
This is Purplish from CPR News and the Colorado Capital News Alliance.